This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com. And today I have a man. He's had AWA matches, WWE matches. He's been a staple in Ohio. He's one of Toledo's favorite sons. He's wrestled for the Sheik. He's wrestled in Hawaii for the Maivias. He's been everywhere. He's even been a promoter for WCW in Toledo, among a ton of other accomplishments. He has an audio book out, the original Bruiser Bedlam, Jerry Graham Jr., also former tag team partners with the legendary Dr. Jerry Graham, Dr. Jerry Graham Jr., his kayfabe son, Jerry Jaff. How are you doing today, sir?
Real good, Hannibal. Thank you for having me.
No problem. I met you several times at the Cauliflower Alley Club, and I think I did a couple short interviews with you. I think we were at a table together at one of
Yeah,
the award ceremonies. So you're one of the nice wrestlers.
I
There's
was
there's
saying
a
the
lot
same
of
thing.
wrestlers.
I don't like most people, but I seem to take a liking to you for some reason. I don't know why. I haven't figured it out yet, but I'll work on it. But you seem to be a
Well,
pretty
I
nice guy.
I think it's the connection that I was friends with superstar Billy Graham, who
Yeah,
of course Dr. Jerry Graham got into the wrestling business.
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
What would he be? Your uncle? What would he
He would
be?
be my uncle. He would be Dr. Graham's brother. That would make him my uncle. And we were talking before we went on the air about these computer experts. And one guy I was reading one time that stuck with me, I remember it, made a big deal about saying, he's not really a Graham. His name is Jerry Jaffe. He lives in Toledo, Ohio. I said, well, you know what? Eddie Graham, of blessed memory, was Eddie Gossett. His son Mike Graham was not a Graham. Luke Graham was not a Graham. Superstar Graham was not a Graham. And even Jerry Graham wasn't a Graham originally. He was adopted when his mother married a guy named Graham. But the thing is, singling me out as being a Fall Graham, I thought was kind of amusing, considering that none of us were really. But it was an organization that Jerry brought together, and it made an impact on people. And he definitely helped me in my career, and he was definitely had a mind for the business. And I learned a lot about ring psychology from the good doctor.
Now, here's something interesting about wrestling fans. They'll say you're not a Graham, but they don't question that you're a doctor.
Well, I am a doctor, 4 PhDs, 8 master's degrees, 16 bachelor's degrees. Barely got out of high school. And in fact, my high school wrestling coach wrote me a letter once years ago. He says, world's most highly educated wrestler. I remember going to the principal of the school and begging him to graduate you.
Ah, you also went to military school. I saw on your Facebook, which is under Jerry Jaff, you
Well,
have
that's the
some
Army.
military pictures.
That was the Army. That wasn't school. That was the Army. I was in the Army for 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you see any action?
Well, I was a cook at Fort Knox. Whenever the food wasn't right, the guys beat the hell out of me. But other than that, no. No,
Yeah, I
I
under,
stayed in the States for 2 years, mostly in Kentucky, 6 weeks in Pennsylvania. And then I got out, you know, did
I
what I was told.
understand. I understand Dr. Jerry Graham was also in the Army, so you had that in connection.
Well, the difference was he was with the 82nd Airborne and he saw plenty of combat action and he had stories to tell. And that's one thing you put on the plus meter. He was a decorated World War II veteran. That's worth something on the good side of the meter. And he always tells me he served under General Slim Jim Gavin. And that was who ran the outfit that he was, the 82nd Airborne, I believe. That was probably the top guy. But he always talked about General Slim Jim Gavin. So World War II decorated war hero.
And for the people that want to give him hell that he was an alcoholic,
Well,
like a lot of wrestlers are, lots of World War veterans, like my grandfather was alcoholic too after World War II, because it screws you up in the mind and you have to escape.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that in a minute. I've had a lot of friends of mine who went to Vietnam. I was fortunate. I was just patriotic enough. I went in the Army, but I didn't volunteer for anything. Had they sent me to Vietnam, I would have gone, but fortunately, they did not. I did what the country asked of me, which was not too much, just to be a cook, which was in some ways hazardous duty, but I had to make sure everything was right every night. But other than that, I don't even like to mention my military service because I really, it was just 2 years of cooking, and it was like a job. And then I came home, but I did I did what they asked me to do. So
I did 2 years of the reserves too, so but I was only in the reserves, so we do have one thing in common. We did 2 years of service.
there you go.
So as I know you used to be an amateur wrestler,
Mhm.
and you did some baseball and swimming and some other sports. What got you into pro wrestling?
Well, from the time I was a little kid sitting in my parents' modest house with the black and white TV set watching wrestling, I was fascinated with it for some reason. And it's like many wrestlers, they start off as fans when they're children. But it was Herodotus that said, circumstances rule men, men don't rule circumstances. A lot of guys, when they're kids, they want to be airplane pilots, they want to be policemen, firemen, romantic jobs like that. And then they grow up and life takes a hold of them and they go where it takes them. With me, I realized when I got out of high school and got drafted, and then I met my wife, Brenda, when I was in the Army, and I came back married, and then we had children. I didn't think that my dream for pro wrestling was going to come true, but we had a family business, the Tyler Meat Company, and when I got out of the Army, they gave me a job driving a truck, delivering, and the man that managed our service station that took care of our trucks was Martino Angelo, a fellow Canadian of yours. He's original from Hamilton, Ontario, but he moved to Toledo, and he was the promoter of Toledo. And what's the chances? So then I started talking to him, and he started taking me to the gym, and he started training me, and he got me started on the career. And the first promotion I worked for was the Sheik. That's what we promoted Toledo for, was the Sheik. And it was just like, and then the few times I got discouraged and quit, I'd always get a call from a promoter saying, "I think we can use you." And it was always a kick up. So I don't want to get too existential here, but I think I was destined, for good or for bad. That was my destiny, because just like Al Pacino said in Godfather 3, just as I thought I was out, they'd pull me back in. Yeah, that's right. So that's just the way
Well,
it is.
I'm aware that the Toledo was a big territory for the Sheik, one of the big towns. What was it like meeting the Sheik for the first time after growing up in the area and being aware of the legend of the Sheik?
Well, after Angela trained me enough, and then if he says the Sheik wants to meet you, and the Sheik tells me this, wasn't aware of this, but I had just gotten out of the Army, and the Sheik said I stood at attention when I talked to him. The Sheik had been in the Army too. He was a World War II veteran as well. And he said, it was always so funny. He said, I came in, you could tell I was a little bit nervous, and I just stood at attention, just like I was talking to a general. Automatic. I didn't even know I did it, but the Sheik would tell that good naturedly. He wouldn't make fun of me, but he told me good naturedly, in future conversation. I'll never forget the first time we met. You stood at attention.
As far as wrestling the Sheik, were you ever actually in the ring with them?
Many times, many times. And like I said, I have wrestled most of the uh, big names of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm not going to say all of them. I trained with Randy Savage. He had already been in the business, but we had trained together in Toledo, and we kind of clicked. And for a long time, the Sheik had Randy and I working his opening matches in all the towns. And we were the opening match because, the opening match, in my opinion, and many other promoters' opinion, is the second most important match on the card, because that sets the tone. If you have a first match that's not any good, it puts the people in a bad mood. And of course, your most important match is the main event. That's what they bought the tickets for. But you want to get them off on a good foot. And I took that as a compliment that they had Randy and I working their first match all over the territory.
What was his personality like at that time when he would have been at the top at the lower end of the card? Because we know as he got more towards the top and became a superstar, he was a little eccentric.
Well, he was a tough man in real life, and there's something about this guy. When we first met, we clicked. He was like an uncle or something. I don't know what to say. I remember one time in Muskegon, Michigan, we're coming out of the arena, and a bunch of rowdy youths got around him in a threatening mode, and everybody ran except me. And he never forgot that I was the only one that stood beside him, and we bluffed our way out of it. We talked to the first guy that would have attacked us would have been cut to ribbons. I can tell you that. I don't know if it would have won the fight or not, but everybody else ran but me, and he remembered that. And for the longest time, He'd invite me up to his house. I'd bring my kids up there. He had an indoor swimming pool. He had a ring in the backyard. I helped train some of the newer wrestlers after I had gotten some experience. And then one day in Indianapolis, he and Dr. Jerry Graham got in a horrible argument. And at this time, I wasn't Jerry Graham's son yet. We just rode there together because Jerry lived in Toledo. And so we just shared. I was Jerry Jaffe Jabroni, and Jerry Graham was there, and him and she got horrible, and the Sheik fired both of us. I guess I was guilt by association. And all my bookings were canceled, and I tried calling him to ask him what happened. He wouldn't come to the phone and talk to me. And years later, his son, Eddie Jr., asked me, "Whatever happened to you? You stopped coming around." I said, "Your dad fired me." He says, "He did? Why?" I said, "I have no idea. I called him and asked him. He wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't come to the phone." And then the second I went to work for the competition, Flying Fred Curry, I got a phone call from him. So in other words, it was okay not to work for him, but I couldn't work for anybody else. So I wasn't going to stiff Fred Curry, so I went with him. But to this day, I have no idea. I don't know what him and Jerry. Maybe Jerry said some things that should have got him fired. It could have been. I don't know what they were talking about. They were yelling at each other. But what did it have to do with me? And why did I get fired? We'll never know. All the participants have gone to their reward, and it's just a mystery to me why I got fired. He even blackballed me once. I was working for Dick the Bruiser, and Dick the Bruiser called me up one day and says, "Jerry, I'm going to have to stop using you for a few months." And I says, "Why?" He says, "Well, I'm going to be doing some things with the Sheik in Indianapolis and Detroit." And he said, "I can't use you as part of the price, but I'll bring you back and make it up to you." So I was furious then that he went to another promoter. But when it was over, Bruiser brought me back and made it up to me. So Bruiser's one of the best promoters I ever worked for. But that was something that the Sheik, why would he do that? I was just, at that time, I wasn't even Jerry Graham Jr. yet. I was just an undercard. And, but that's the business, swimming with sharks, I guess.
You mentioned the competition, Fred Curry and the Sheik. I understand when the second promotion started in the Detroit territory, it actually boosted business overall in the territory. Is that true?
Which promotion are you talking about? I'm a little.
Okay, maybe it's not Fred Curry. Who was the one that went in opposition to the Sheik in Detroit?
Dick the Bruiser. He was
Oh, it
running
was Bruiser.
He was running the
Okay.
Olympia. At that time, I was still working for the Sheik. I was still with the Sheik at that time. But some of the guys would go and meet Bruiser at the Sheraton Hotel in Detroit after the matches, and that's when I first met Bruiser there. And he seemed like a nice guy, but it was Les Ruffin, the promoter from Cincinnati, that got me hooked up with Bruiser in the first place. I never forget old Les. He was a good guy, and he had been in the business. I kept in touch with him till he died. Yeah.
So Fred Curry was running Toledo then?
Fred Curry came into Toledo, and we had some big houses. And that's when I first became Jerry Graham Jr. With Fred Curry, I was managing Jerry. Jerry was going to wrestle Wild Bull Curry in a brass knuckles match, and I was going to be his manager. And me, like many other people, were thinking that these two old guys, they were both in their 60s, and they tore the house down, which goes to show if you know what you're doing and you know your limitations and your strengths. And they absolutely tore the house down. And and then I started working, and Fred liked what he saw, so we started teaming Jerry and I together. And we started working in Southern Ohio. We had some big houses down there with the Currys versus the Graham. The gimmick was father and son versus father and son. But in Curry's case, they were real father and son. And with Jerry and I, it was working father and son. But that's where he got started. Then a lot of independent promoters all the way to New York City. I wrestled for an independent promoter in New York City with Jerry Graham. He got me into a lot of places, and my career was way better off for having been with him. So, like I said, definitely has some positive points.
What was the name of Curry's promotion?
I don't remember, to be honest. At the end of it, I bought in with Curry's promotion. We were partners together. He liked me a lot. I worked for Curry. He made me his partner. I worked for George Cannon. He made me his partner. I worked for Dick the Bruiser. He made me his partner. So I must have had something to offer. They came to me with partnership deals, and I went for all of them and made money with all of them. So they like my ideas. I guess, once again, I'm going to just stay humble, but uh, they all like the ideas I would come up with, the angles. In those days, today they're called storylines. In the old days, they called them angles. And I could always come up with something to do that was a little different and would draw money. And, uh, and they all took advantage of that.
Well, I understand that Jerry Graham was actually very close with McMahon Sr. and Jr. I heard he was Vince McMahon Jr.'s favorite wrestler, and they used to drive together, and he would actually give ideas to the McMahons as well. So maybe some of that was run off on you.
Well, anything that I did as far as angles is concerned, I learned. I'm not professionally, I woke up a genius like Albert Einstein. What I would do is I would listen to the older guys talking about different things that they had done. And a lot of the guys, Bulldog Don Kent, but where I really got my PhD in wrestling psychology was from King Curtis Iakea, Lord James Blears, and a little bit from Mark Lewin. Those guys were geniuses. And I watched what they did and remembered some of the stuff they did. But Jerry Graham too, he could always think of something to do. You come to an independent promotion and the guy was lost, and Jerry says, "Why don't you do this or that?" And it always worked. Whatever he said to do, it always worked. So if it wasn't been for his problem with alcohol, I think he'd have probably had his own territory like his brother Eddie.
As far as the McMahon relationship with Jerry Graham, I heard that there was a big riot involving Jerry Graham that he said
Yep.
was the highlight of his career, but it actually got wrestling banned from Madison Square Garden for a while. Could you share your
I
version of
can
that story?
I can give you a pretty good deal because I know two of the guys who were in that riot, and I heard the stories separately. One was Dick the Bruiser, who told me about it in Indianapolis. The other was Jerry Graham. It was pretty much the same story. What happened is Graham and Bruiser were tag team partners against Rocca and Ed Carpentier. And at the end of the match, Carpentier and Rocca won the match, but Dick the Bruiser got mad and he picked up a chair and hit Rocca in the head, and Jerry Graham zipped him. And well, as they started beating up Rocca, who was a big, big hero in New York, and so he's bleeding and getting beaten up. So they stormed the ring, and a huge riot started. And Dick the Bruiser told me there was a way out under the ring. There was a trap door, and he didn't know about it. All of a sudden, he says Carpentier, Graham, and Rocca were gone, and they left him there standing in the ring. But he somehow got out alive. But Dick the Bruiser was barred for life from New York. Jerry Graham was barred for life from New York. However, he got a lawyer, and because he was a war hero, they put him on double secret probation, I guess. They let him come back if he behaved himself. Graham was fined, I believe. I might be wrong. Someone's a catch me this. I'm thinking Bruiser and Graham got fined $5,000. Rocca got fined $1,500. And what did he do? He got hit by a chair. I mean, he didn't. And then Ed Carpentier got fined $500. He absolutely did nothing. And then they closed wrestling down, and there was a big move to have wrestling outlawed for a while in New York. So you can go too far with your heat, and it'll come back to bite you. You know, you want to get heat, but you don't want that kind of heat. It's just not good for business. And for a while, they were talking about a compromise. Once again, this is secondhand anecdotal, that they were not going to let children into the matches. They're going to make wrestling like a nudie bar. And no children allowed. But finally, things straightened out, and they went back, and they just learned to behave themselves a little better. But I remember when I was wrestling for Vince Jr. at the Chase Hotel, I was managing Adrian Adonis and Dick Murdoch, and they had trouble with the fans, and they were out, and so they were my team. So I went out to help them, and Vince Jr. was right there. He said, "Get back in the ring right now." And looking back on that, at the time, I just did what I was told because Vince was the boss. But I think he was concerned about another riot and losing St. Louis maybe. So I think it was probably the right thing for him to do. You know.
So
But
how did that come about with you managing Murdoch and Adonis when they were in St. Louis for WWE?
well, I went to George Cannon. I was working for him, and he made a deal with Vince to bring his TV and put it on George's TV. And they gave George a piece of Detroit, and he says, Jerry's a pretty good hand, especially a good talker, and why don't you use him? So they used me in a few matches, and I got to go to Kuwait, which was an adventure for me. But the Chase Hotel was my last employment for Vince. I was there. I did what they told me, and what they told me to do, which I did, was nothing. They said just stand there, and we don't want you doing too much. We don't want you running up and down. I was managing John Studd as well. They brought me as a manager. They got me these tuxedos and everything, and I thought, well, this is my time. But they made a point to tell me when I was managing not to run up and down the ring, not to grab anybody's foot under the bottom rope or slug anybody. And then they said, when the match is over, Gene Okerlund is going to ask you a question. We're not going to tell you what that question is because they want to see how fast you are on your feet. This is Pat Patterson talking to me. And the whole thing, the question and the answer is only going to be a minute. So the match is over with John Studd. And I go out of the ring and they says, what does John Studd need you for? Why are you have to be in his corner? He's a big man. He seems tough enough. So without any preparation, I came up with this. And I'll tell you why. Because too many people take advantage of him. With me in his corner, I can make sure the referees are honest. I can make sure the commissioners are honest. I can make sure the promoters are honest. He doesn't have to worry about his money. He doesn't have to worry about backstabbers. I protect him in every possible way. So when he's in that ring, all he has to have on his mind is his match. I thought that was a pretty good answer for spontaneity. There was no. I get back to the dressing room and John Studd chews me out from top to bottom. You shouldn't talk about yourself. You should talk about me. You got to get me over. I says, John, did you hear the question they asked me? The question is, why did you need me? So I was just thoroughly disgusted at the time. And Studd used to go around bragging he had gotten me fired. But Pat Patterson may have. I've heard a lot of stories about Pat Patterson. All I can say is nothing was done to me directly. But when I went up to his hotel room to talk to him about what they wanted to do, I thought I was in the court of Caligula with some of the other guys he had up there. It was not a pretty sight for me. So, but I figured I didn't say anything. I didn't make any remarks because I thought this was my coming. Well, anyway, apparently between John Studd, me not being too nice to Pat Patterson, other things, I go back to Toledo. By that time, I was running a Tyler Meat Company, and I had been out calling on customers. And I came back at noon, and my secretary says, you got a note here. A woman called from the WWF. She didn't even know that was wrestling. She just said, from the WWF. She says, don't come back anymore. So I figured, if they didn't want me, I was good, and Vince didn't have time for me. I understand that, but I was good friends with George Steele. I was good friends with Jay Strongbow. I was not quite as friendly, but a little bit friendly with Gorilla Monsoon. I figured somebody could have called me and said, look at Jerry, it's just not what we're looking for right now. Maybe down the road. There's polite ways, but to have his secretary call my secretary and fire me was, to me, it was a low class thing to do. And, I'm a high class person, so I'm sensitive to that sort of thing. But it is what it is.
As far as Adrian Adonis, what did you think of him?
He was to me, I know there's a lot of controversy about him, but to me, he came up to me. He was a disciple of Jerry Graham too, by the way. And we got along just fine. We hung around together. He was on the Kuwait tour, and I always heard about him being stiff and being a crowbar, but he was as easy a guy to work with as anybody I've ever stepped in the ring with in my many, many years in the business. So to me, Adrian was okay. I know some other people have problems with him, and he got in a fight with, who was he got in a fight with?
Dan Spivey.
Yeah, Dan Spivey. I heard all those stories. All I could say, as far as I was concerned, he was nice to me. He was a gentleman to me. When I got in the ring, he was nice, loose. I mean, he wasn't a candy butt. I mean, you tie up a little bit. He was snug, but nothing that I wasn't perfectly comfortable with. He was, to me, that's how he treated me, to answer your question.
As far as that Kuwait tour, did that happen to be the one where Jimmy Snuka went berserk in the plane on the way home?
No, on my Kuwait tour, Ivan Koloff and the Iron Sheik got in a genuine shoot fight, and the Iron Sheik bit a chunk of meat out of Koloff's neck. He bit him in the neck, and he was bleeding from the neck. And they had to break him up, and they had these security guards on the plane with guns. These guys had their guns out, and they didn't know what was going on. I feel, oh my gosh, we're going to get shot, And by the time we got to Kuwait, they were the best of buddies again, though. But it was just a matter of maybe a couple of drinks too many, and I'm still not sure what they were fighting about. But I know Bulldog Don Kent, my most consistent tag team partner, we went on that trip together. And Jimmy Snuka wasn't on the trip I went on, but we certainly had some fireworks. It's just a different different wrestlers though.
Yeah, because I understand those tours weren't that well publicized at the time, and they're not very well documented. But WWE did a handful of Middle East tours in those years that really helped fund the company because they got paid a lot of money. And on one of them, Jimmy Snuka had like a meltdown on the flight home. So maybe you should be happy you weren't on that plane ride.
Well, I would say this: Jimmy Snook and I always got along too. But if he was having a meltdown, I would have run the other way. He is one guy I wouldn't have wanted to tangled with. I was a worker. I wasn't a shooter. That's something else I've noticed on the internet. You have too. They're always talking about who could beat who in a shoot. How is that relevant to our business? I'm asking. Let me ask you one question. How is can who beat who relevant in our business in a shoot?
People are just interested in it for whatever reason because of the fantasy world of wrestling, I guess. They want to know who would win
Yeah.
in real
Well,
matches.
well, I'll tell you this one thing. You're younger than me, but let's assume we were in the same age group, we're in the same shape, same condition, everything. You're bigger than me, you're stronger than me, you're tougher than me. If we got into the ring and said, "This is going to be a shoot, Hannibal, if you can pin Jerry in 2 minutes, we'll give you $50,000." There's not a doubt in my mind that you'd have collected your $50,000 that night. But if they said, "We want 20-minute Broadway," and we were working together, I have no doubt that we could have entertained the people for 20 minutes. I mean, I just don't get this who can beat who in a shoot because I couldn't beat up anybody. I got beat up by a Quaker once. I mean, everybody could beat me up, but we.
I
But
think it's because it doesn't have the mystique as it used to now. Because
yeah,
when you guys were doing it, it was kayfabe.
oh
Everyone was
yeah.
kind of looked at as tough. But now the mystique is gone, and with some of the guys like CM Punk that expose themselves,
Mm.
it's people always wonder the toughness now.
Well, I'll tell you what I was taught on that. I'm not going to mention the guy's name because he's dead. He can't defend himself. And I really don't like to speak ill of the dead. But when I was doing a business, there was a guy I used to ride with. I used to think he was a good guy. And we got in the ring to work one night, and he absolutely beat the hell out of me. And I wasn't afraid of this guy physically. I'm a little bit tougher than what I claim to be in my jokes, but I wasn't basically a tough guy. But anyway, I took it because I thought the promotion would be mad at me if I didn't sell him. So I got out of the ring, beaten up pretty good. And Chris Colt came up to me and he said, "What did you take that for?" And I says, "Well, I didn't want to get anybody mad at me if I'd have fought back. They're trying to get him over." He says, "You do not have to take a beating like that." So I got mad. I went into the Sheik's office back in the dressing room and I told him what happened. And I says, I went along with it because I didn't want to mess the show up. But from now on, if that happens again, I'm fighting back. And the Sheik says, if anybody does that to you, you can do whatever you need to do. Shoot with him, beat him, whatever. You don't have to take a beating like that. He told me the same thing. But with the wisdom of Solomon, he never booked the two of us together again either. So he told me what I
That
wanted to
happened.
hear. And
That happened to me too when it started. Because sometimes you don't know how fake wrestling is supposed to be or how real, and you just think that this is the way wrestling is what I found when I first got in. And then finally they say, no, you shouldn't be taking so much from these guys.
yeah, well, I don't mind selling a guy if he's working. I was there, I was a job guy, and everybody wanted to work with me at the TV matches. And I thought, gee, I must be a great worker, boy. And then Bulldog Don Kent told me, he says, well, you're pretty good for a new guy, but the reason they want to work with you is because you're not dangerous. When you throw a flying head scissors, you don't put your knee in the guy's face. You actually hook their head and take them over. And when you do various moves, you always protect the guy, like you were taught by Angelo. And so that's why they wanted to work with me. Nobody wants to get hurt by a job guy in a TV station. And they said I was safe to work with. And I kind of took that as a compliment because they would come in and request working with me. A lot of them would anyway, not everybody. But it made me feel good.
So you've been involved in some fan attack situations. What do you think about wrestlers today now that they'll have people thrown out for name calling and it'll become news for a week? Oh, somebody called me this, somebody called me that. Where in your day you're actually dealing with some life or death situations and fan attacks.
Are you
And
talking
it
about
doesn't make
fans?
any
You talking about fans calling names or who's calling?
yeah, now fans will call a wrestler name. It happens to Sami Zayn in WWE recently, to a woman in AEW, and it they eject the fan, and then I understand that, but it becomes wrestling news for a week. Oh, how terrible! Someone's got their feelings hurt. Blah 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 blah. Wrestlers were supposed to be tough,
Well,
and like
as
now
many
they're
times as I was
feeling.
attacked, physically attacked by fans, it's kind of funny. They called you a name. It was it was. I never heard that. But I'm kind of laughing because I never heard that before. It's definitely news to me that the fans get called out for calling you names because they called me every name in the book, and in fact, I would make a joke with my mother of blessed memory, who was living at the time, and I'd say, geez, I didn't know you knew so many people in Fort Wayne. And she said, I don't know anybody in Fort Wayne. Well, they always tell me my mother does this, my mother does that. You know, name calling was part of the business. I didn't mind getting called names, but I was doing my job. They got people mad at me. It was okay to call me names. It didn't bother me in the slightest, in the slightest, you know. But,
What was the scariest fan attack situation you were involved with?
okay. It was with Bull Curry and Fred Curry against me and Jerry. And the referee was a 16-year-old kid named Jimmy Hines, who later became Bobby Fulton of the Fantastics. And he liked wrestling so much he was hanging around the business, so Fred let him referee that night. And so the end of the match called for us to get disqualified. So the referee disqualified us, and the Currys left the ring. So we take this 16-year-old kid, and Jerry and me start beating him up. And it was his hometown, I believe, Chillicothe, Ohio. And the fans went nuts. They started coming in the ring. I started running up and down the apron, punching them just to keep them from getting in the ring. And then the Currys came running back out and said, you know, get back, get back, get back. We'll handle them. And they beat us back to the dressing room while they were protected. They put us in the middle, and they stood on the outside of us, and they beat us back to the dressing room. And that was pretty scary. That was probably the scariest of them all, yeah, because they were coming in. I mean, they were just swarming the ring from all four sides. And there were some other ones too, but that one came to mind first. So that must have been the most, when you asked me the question, that's the first one that came to my mind.
When you lived with Jerry Graham, he worked for you at one point, you had a restaurant, you
Yes.
traveled with him. What was the most difficult situation you ran into him as far as controlling him? And I'm not saying this in a bad way. I find his
No,
antics funny personally.
it's with me, I've heard stories a lot worse, okay? With me, it was just him getting drunk. And one time I had to drive all the way back from New Jersey. Usually, if it was two guys, you take turns driving, but he's going. So him getting drunk after the matches, and I have to listen to him all the way home. And then he was coming to some of the matches drunk, and then one day a promoter came to me and says, "Jerry, we like you, but we don't want Big Jerry to come back anymore." And I just says, well, just don't say anything. Just call me and book me. I didn't want to go to Jerry and say they don't want you anymore. And so he called me. I was making shots. I don't know if Jerry knew about them or not. But on one hand, uh, uh, when I got back from Hawaii, a guy called me from Philadelphia and wanted Jerry and me to come to Philadelphia. And Jerry was in Toledo at that time because he was going to wrestle in Toledo that week. And I knew where he was staying, and they said he wasn't home. He wouldn't come to the phone. Later, they told me he was mad at me and he wouldn't talk to me. Well, it was just one booking, but you hate to lose any work if you can get it. And but he was mad because I was running a promotion, Bruiser Bedlam, and I wasn't bringing him in. But he was living in Los Angeles. You know, and airplane tickets are exorbitantly expensive. And I could, if he was living around the area, I would have found something for him to do. But I couldn't fly a guy in from Los Angeles to wrestle on a card in Findlay, Ohio. I mean, come on. It was you promoted. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
It's funny he lived in LA. He reminds me so much of Marlon Brando
No,
in both looks wise and eccentricity and
no.
everything. Do you find that too?
Well, I never thought of it before. I'd have to process that for a while. But yeah, they were both overweight, and they were both. Uh, I don't know if Marlon Brando drank as much as Jerry Graham, but Marlon Brando certainly had a very sad life, and Jerry Graham had a sad life, and
Brando got to Jerry Graham's size by the end of it. They were both
Yeah, I was thinking he
similar
was
weight.
overweight, but Brando had his uh, uh, daughter commit suicide, his son do time in prison for manslaughter. I mean, that's a tough thing, no matter how much money you got when it's your kids involved. There's no amount of money can cover up the pain. Uh,
Yeah.
it's a, but no, that was it. I suppose he could be compared to Marlon Brando. He definitely was as big. Marlon Brando got as big as Jerry at the end, no question. He was up there. Mm.
And Marlon's interviews toward the end were pretty wacky, which reminds me of an interview that I just watched of Jerry Graham doing probably the only quote unquote shoot interview he ever did, which was a soft shoot interview. But one thing that stood out to me of that, he really buries Eddie Graham. Did he have heat with Eddie Graham?
He he had some animosity. He never told me why. The nuts and bolts I don't know. The overview I do know. Apparently, Vince McMahon had trouble with the Fargos, and they left. And Jerry says, "You don't need them. You could, the Graham brothers. I know a guy in Tennessee. I guess he was from him, Eddie Gossett. He says, let's bring him up and make him Eddie Graham, and you'll have the Graham brothers. We'll do just as good as the Fargo brothers. They did better than the Fargo brothers." But and Eddie probably did everything he was told. They were a big success. So I'm thinking his thing was, I made that guy. I took him, made him what he is today, and now he's a big shot in Florida. He won't talk to me, but I'm sure there was reasons he wouldn't talk to him. That's the overview. Any specific conversations or specific things that may have happened I'm not aware of.
And he was very specific that, in his view, Eddie killed himself because the government and intelligence services were investigating him and he couldn't take the heat. Is that basically the reason you understood as well?
You know as much as I do. All I know about that is what I've heard on the internet and from other wrestlers that were down there. I've heard he was investigated for some kind of a land fraud deal or something, but I don't know. I don't know about it. I can't. I'm not qualified to talk about it. I'd rather not because suicide's a very serious business, and I don't know about it. So it's probably just best to take a pass on that.
Yeah, sad situation. We won't get into to Mike
Well, if I
also
knew anything,
committing
I'd tell
suicide.
you. If I knew anything, I'd
Yeah.
tell you, but I don't. Yeah, I just want you to know. I'm not evading the question. I just don't know anything to give you
Oh,
a definitive
oh, I'm
answer.
sure you don't. And
Yeah,
actually, Jerry Graham wasn't there at the time either, and you weren't in the territory at the time either, so it's not like you would have had
yeah.
firsthand information on it.
Hmm.
As far as promoting WCW in Toledo, how did that happen?
They called me, and uh, so I said, "Yeah, I'll do it." They gave me a contract, and I did pretty good job for them. They were on two TV stations, Fox and ABC, and Miller Beer was paying for all their TV time, thanks to me. And then they told me that here's the way this is going to work. For 4 weeks, we're going to have generic interviews on the tape. And then for 4 weeks, we're going to have specific interviews to the upcoming show in Toledo. So I said, okay. So the first 4 weeks, then came the fifth week, generic interviews. I called them and said, hey, we've got a show scheduled. The sixth week, generic interviews. I'm screaming. I can't believe it. I said, you're not doing any promos. Seventh, and there was nothing. They had promos on the day of the show. They put on the promos the day before, the day of the show, Saturday night. They put on promos for 1 week, and they did 16 or 17,000. I was going around to disc jockeys I know, giving out tickets to pass out, doing everything I could. And the promoter, the arena manager there at the convention center was named Barney Levengood. He'd been in Baltimore, Indianapolis. And he says, usually when it comes to wrestling, the big office complains about the local promoter being incompetent. But in this case, you're 100% right. They're fumbling the ball, and you're doing everything you can to patch things up for them. So the next show, I said, well, we had a bad start. Let's do it again. So the next show they run, and the same thing happens. No promos. So I'm going on local TV shows, doing everything I possibly can do. And so our second show, then they said to me, what do you think about running Toledo on a Sunday? I said, I don't think so. I don't think it's any good. So anyway, they ran it anyway and they flopped again. And then Ric Flair comes up to me and he says, I'm never coming to this town again. And I says, why? He says, because look at that. What kind of a promoter are you? There's nobody here. I says, well, maybe it's the main event. You didn't draw any money. I got to get guys in here who can draw money. Obviously, you're not it. Obviously, the thing was they weren't advertising. It wasn't really Flair's fault, but he got in my face, and I'm not going to run from anybody. I said I'd run from you, but I was kidding. I know I might run from you, but I wouldn't run from Flair. Anyway, I says, and then they called me up and says, Jerry, Toledo's not doing so well. We better give it a rest. I just give it a rest. You guys aren't promoting your shows. You're not listening to anything I've got to say. I says, I was telling Terry Funk about it, and he says, if they'll just listen to you, we had Wojo. I know you heard of Wojo. I says, if you had Wojo wrestle Ric Flair in Toledo, you'd do $30,000, $40,000. Just have Flair on a badmouth Wojo, badmouth Toledo. So you guys have had all these nickel and dime second-rate promotions. Now WCW's here, and this Wojo, and he says, we can't have it. Wojo's not on our TV show. I says, make it a non-title match. Wojo, whatever you want to do. Wojo just wants the money too. It wasn't matter who's going to go over or anything like that. And Terry Funk said they must, that would have packed it. I said, it wouldn't draw a dime in Houston, wouldn't draw a dime in Atlanta, wouldn't draw a dime in Charlotte, but it would have packed. So then I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. Your biggest house was $17,000. If you promote this and do the way I want to do, I'll give you $20,000 for the show. And they wouldn't take that either. I was going to offer to buy the show with $20,000 up front. Well, anyway, it was totally run by incompetence. The head man's name was Jim Hurd, I'm told. And I tried calling to get results. They had a real nice girl named Georgia answer the phone. And I couldn't get through to Jim Barnett. I couldn't get through to, I can't think of the other big shot, Jim Hurd, of course. I couldn't get through to him. And here comes the best one. Fox calls me, and they were running WCW and WWF. And they says, we just want one wrestling show. If you could have your guys call us, because it's you, Jerry, and you're here, we'll get rid of WWF. Nobody called them. I was begging. I couldn't get anybody to come to the phone. So they kicked WCW off there, and they called me up and they said, how could you let that happen? I mean, it goes on and on and on. The incompetence was mind-boggling. And then they got in some better people running the place, and I guess for a while they did okay. And I lost track of it. But I guess when they had other new management did better. You'd probably know more about that than I would. But
It was a constant roller coaster in WCW.
yeah,
One of the issues that hurt them, they started advertising people that weren't going to be on shows, and it ended up killing their live events business. Something AEW does today.
that's death. That's death when people come to see a certain person and they're not there on a regular basis. You can get away with it once or twice. One time, Buddy Rogers was going to make a comeback at Toledo and team up with Louis Martinez to wrestle the Hells Angels chain gang, Don Fargo and Chris Colt. And Buddy Rogers didn't show up. And they had a huge house that night, and people were not pleased. Remember.
I know you were a fan of Buddy Rogers. I heard Ric Flair on the Joe Rogan podcast. And when they asked Ric Flair who he modeled his career off of, he kayfabed Buddy Rogers. He didn't even mention him. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've talked about not wanting to talk about the dead, but I don't know. A very, very well-known popular wrestler told me Ric Flair's a poor man's Buddy Rogers. Well, it was King Curtis Iakea. He told me he's a poor man's Buddy Rogers. He told me that when I was in Hawaii. And maybe King Curtis is mad at me but he did say it. I wouldn't say something wasn't true. But Ric Flair had a successful career. But some of these stories I heard about him and bankruptcies and all the money he made, and I just wonder, and the way he got rude with me. Oh, somebody splashed a beer on him at the Toledo show, and he was complaining about my security. I had guys in orange shirts that said security, but I also had deputy sheriffs off-duty moonlighting there, and he was furious that somebody got. If you're sitting, I said, if you had J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI watching the ringside, and somebody wanted to splash you with a beer, they'd get through and do it. So they threw the guy out. And a few weeks later, I'm watching on TV, and somebody splashed a beer on Flair at the house show in Atlanta. I wonder if he went to Ted Turner and pounded his desk and said, "I don't like your security." He just, I guess he struck me as a bully. That's just my opinion. The only two people in wrestling that really, let me start at the positive. When I first started wrestling, my first time in the dressing room, I was wrestling. I was going to referee one match to see if I could do it or not. It was George Steele versus Tex McKenzie. I walked in the dressing room. I didn't know anything. I was a nervous wreck. And I didn't know that there's a courtesy of when you see a new face to get up and introduce yourself. Well, the first person on my first time in the dressing room that got up and introduced themselves to me was Andre the Giant. I was just a referee on a trial basis, and he got up and walked across and says, "Andre." And ever since then, we had pleasant conversations in dressing rooms. One I'd run into him, which wasn't that often, but he was always a gentleman. Other than that, the only two guys who were really rough on me was Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan. I will not deny their success. I'm not going to say they were both successful in their business. They were at the top of their game, much farther than I ever went. But does that give you an excuse to be rude to somebody?
Well, now you got to tell us the whole Hogan story.
Well, I will. I was at a NAPI convention. That's for the people that have TV shows that like other channels to syndicate. And I was down there trying to push our Bruiser Bedlam tapes. And it was a long shot, but Bruiser thought it'd be a good idea, so I went down there. And now I had used to talk to Hulk Hogan in Chicago, and then he came to Detroit and St. Louis, and he was always gentleman. I mean, we weren't the best of buddies. I gave him a ride to the airport once, but that doesn't, okay, so I'm with my wife, and we're in a room where you had to pay $750 to get a badge to enter this room because there's a lot of celebrities there from a lot of TV shows. They didn't want anybody there that wasn't in the business, and that's pretty much gets you thins out the herd if it's $750. So anyway, I'm walking with my wife, and Hogan's walking with Brutus Beefcake, and we're kind of walking into each other and said, "Hey, Hulk, how you doing?" And he looks at me. I said, "Hey, Hulk, what's your name?" He said, "Jerry. We used to talk in Chicago, St. Louis, and Detroit." He says, "I don't know you, man." And he takes his arm and slowly pushes me aside and keeps walking. Well, that was rude. Even if he didn't know who I was, he could say, "Yeah, nice to see you. How you doing?" But then I started thinking, this was a closed room. If he didn't know who I was, then he didn't know who I wasn't. What if I had been a program director for the biggest station in New York City or something? Because that's what that convention was for, to get stations to carry your show. You should be polite to everybody in that kind of a situation. He just brushed me aside, just rude. And I'll tell you what Jimmy Hoffa said, who was the great negotiator. He says, yell at somebody, scream at somebody, curse at somebody. That's all allowed. But don't ever talk down to somebody or you'll make an enemy for life. And there was a classic example. All Hulk Hogan had to say is, "Hey, how you doing?" And I'm kind of busy. I'll catch you later or something. You can get rid of somebody politely if you don't have time for them, And between Flair and
Yeah, I
Hogan,
mean, I'm not a star or anything, but some people know me, and they'll remember me more because I'm still current. And if they come up as if they're expecting to remember me, I'll at least pretend
yeah.
that I remember them.
Well, this is when I was
But
pretty active. I was still working in Chicago and Detroit, and I was still seeing Hogan. So it wasn't like I was from a vague, distant past. And but you do the right thing. I'll tell you a funny story about the old and the new. In 1992, I was at the Cauliflower Alley in California at Studio City, And that's the first time I met Buddy Rogers. And I told him, I says, you know, I might be acting like a mark, but I just want you to know that you're the reason I became a wrestler. I watched you on TV and I thought you were great. I wanted to be like you. And he beamed a little bit. I'm sure he heard a lot of that. I mean, I'm not going to make more of it than what it was. I just felt like I wanted to tell him that. And I know it's kind of a Mark thing to do, but I did. But what makes this funny is 15 years later, I'm at the Cauliflower Alley in Las Vegas, and a kid comes up to me and says, Jerry Graham, I just want you to know that the reason I became a wrestler is I used to watch you on TV when I was a kid. When did I become the old man? I don't want to be the old man. I want to be the young, awestruck kid. I don't want to be the old man that inspired somebody else. But it really happened. Guy came up to me and gave me the same speech I gave Rogers. Yeah.
Full circle. And speaking of full circle, karma got Hulk Hogan. It gets all of us eventually, but he's been through hell over. He's finally turning things around now, but he went through about a 10-year period of hell.
Well, I didn't know anything about that. And I'll put it like this. I don't wish anybody harm. I never wished anybody to drop dead or get sick or anything like that. But I just remember, you know, you got to just, just remember those who mistreated you and stay away from them. And if they come to you for a favor, in advance, the favor better benefit you. I mean, if Hulk Hogan would have called me up and says, hey, Jerry, we need a manager and we're going to give you $10,000 a week for a year, I could overlook the insult, you know. But it's just, and a third one, which wasn't quite as bad as Ole Anderson wouldn't shake hands with me. I was working for Georgia Championship Wrestling in Huntington, West Virginia, and I hadn't met Ole before. So I said, hi, Ole, Jerry Graham. And he looked at my hand. He was reading the paper. He looked at my hand, he looked at me, and he looked back at his paper. I said, oh, okay, fine. I thought that's what you're supposed to do when you see somebody you haven't met before, but he's the only guy that didn't do that to me. And every dressing room I've ever been in, I've always welcomed new faces, and people have always welcomed me. Well, Sailor White, he welcomed me kind of different when I went to Nova Scotia. He comes up to me, think about this, the first time on the road, I was in my 20s, just out of the Army, just been trained, and I was there just to do jobs. I knew my place. And he comes to me and says, just remember one thing, I'm top heel in this territory, and you better learn that right now. That's how he introduced himself to me.
That sounds about right from what I've heard about his character. When you talk about seeing Hogan in Chicago and Detroit, was that when you were working for AWA?
No, I was working for WWF. I used to work when they first took over for Cannon, they used to put me on the Detroit shows. And when I was working for AWA, I'd see him in Chicago. And then in WWF, I seen him in St. Louis. But then WWF fired me. But I was still, I'm not sure if I'd already been fired from them or not. But anyway, I was working for Bruiser as well. But anyway, regardless of the circumstances, he could have said, hi, how you doing? And let it go at that. There's all kinds of ways, and he's just a rude person. And like I said, I don't wish him any harm. I don't wish him to get sick. I don't wish. I'm not that type of a person, you know. But I just put it like this. You know how they say blind people become more sensitive to smell and to taste and to touch? Well, intelligent people like me become more sensitive to stupid people. And it's not, someone like you, Devin, it's not too bright. You would understand, but smart people would understand. Smart people would understand that how hard it is to meet dumb people. You know, one time, that reminds me, there was a guy who worked TV for Fred Curry, a very good commentator named Rick Bratton. And he had his son, Boomer Bratton, come to work for Indianapolis. And he interviewed me for the first time, and I said, Boomer Bratton, as I understand, you're related to Rick Bratton, aren't you his son? And he says, yeah, my father was a wrestling commentator in Columbus. I says, you know, I thought he was the stupidest guy I ever met, but you're dumber than your dad, if that's possible. He was shocked. But then Boomer and me became good friends because he knew it was a work.
You mentioned Wojo. Someone wanted to know if you think he could have done better in wrestling given his background if he was pushed more on a national scale.
Well, they had the opportunity, they chose not to. And I'll tell you about Wojo as what I think as a booker. I think that the WWF, and they did very well without me or Wojo. I understand that. Okay. So we understand they're the greatest promotion that ever was based on money. But I think a good thing they could have done was put Wojo on crew, second tier, have him win most of his matches, but if they needed somebody over, because Wojo was business oriented. He would do the job if you needed him to do the job. Uh, and he could go to colleges and stuff and work out with the team with the teams and the colleges and stuff, and it would give street cred to the promotion. So let's say he goes and works out with the University of Syracuse wrestling team, and he beats their heavyweight and their light heavyweight and whatever. Then that night Hulk Hogan beats him. That's the street cred, you see, and he'd be a policeman if they had trouble with anybody. And I think it would be a good guy to have on hand, but they didn't see it my way. But I think that he would have been an asset to any. Vern Gagne called him and wanted him to be a Russian, and Wojo didn't want to be a Russian, so that didn't work out. And he worked for Carlos Colon in Puerto Rico. I don't know how that worked. He came back pretty quick, but he was booked in Atlanta. Ric Flair got him booked in Atlanta, but then they canceled. They canceled him before he left. He never got down there. But Wojo used to challenge the audience. We've talked about that before. You get $10,000 if you can pin Wojo in 5 minutes. And that was really believable. And I don't think anybody could have pinned him. You see, in wrestling, amateur wrestling especially, I believe you were an amateur wrestler, they're very big on stalling. But we took that rule out of the, so if somebody, let's say some national champion or somebody came down to wrestle Wojo, if you're allowed to stall, a guy of Wojo's caliber is not getting pinned. It's not, it's not going to happen, but very few people went to 5 minutes. Most of them went down in a minute or so, but he was so believable. So it was just, I think it was a wasted talent, but once again, everything went on without us. And I'm not happy with Vince McMahon, but you've got to admit he was the best, to this point in history, he was the best promoter there ever was based on sales and making money. There's no question he was the best promoter there ever was. That's how you judge any business, whether it's the wholesale meat business, like I was in, the wrestling business, or a restaurant, or an adult bookstore. Is how much money you make is the only judge of your success in that business. If you're making money, if you're not making money, you're not successful. I won't use the word failure. That's too strong of a word. But I will say you're not successful if you don't make money.
So we could say AEW losing 34 million last year would be considered not successful.
Yes, that could be, unless they got these oil wells in the old country and he was able to use it as a tax write-off. I don't know, but if
that's possible. That's very possible.
But if you take, but all kidding aside, if you take that promotion as a single entity, if it lost that much money, it was not successful. And I don't say that with any glee. I don't talk down my nose at anybody because I've had business ventures, not just in wrestling. I've had successful business ventures and I've had failures. Fortunately for me, I've had more successes than failures, and I'm living a comfortable retirement. But even Vince McMahon had several businesses that didn't work, but the wrestling was his thing. His football didn't work, his bodybuilding didn't work. Somebody told me he'd been in the construction business, and that didn't work.
But he also tried promoting Evel Knievel. That didn't work. He tried promoting boxing. That didn't work. Supposedly, the film side of WWE has pretty much ceased to exist as well.
Yeah, well, but the thing is, he was the best at something. And most people don't realize why he was the best. I think I've got it figured out. He promoted wrestling. He had good talent and stuff, but he was the first one that really knew how to use the technology. He figured out about how cable TV worked, the satellites, this to that, bring it to your front room. Years ago, Terry Funk told me in a joking way, this would be the best business in the world if the towns would come to us. And Vince McMahon arranged for the towns to come to you. You buy pay-per-view. You have to make some trips, but the big money was in one city and the whole country paid to see one match on pay-per-view TV. And he was the one that mastered that. And even though I don't like the way I was treated personally, professionally, you cannot knock this man. I've heard there's a lot of bad publicity going around about him, and that's unfortunate. But and I hear that the new promotion, maybe you can hear, is the new promotion doing well that bought him out?
Yes, but as you said, now it's not just nationwide, it's worldwide, and there's all these new streams of revenue
Yeah.
coming
Well,
internationally that never existed before.
well, I heard somebody use an expression about business once, and I used it as everything has a shelf life. Now, Vince McMahon one day will be topped by another promotion because of things like, do you know Jack Dempsey was the highest paid boxer in history until Muhammad Ali? But sooner or later, somebody was going to come along and beat the record. And if things are changing, if it's going worldwide, I know Vince McMahon had shows in Europe and the Middle East and this and that, but if it's getting bigger, somebody's going to beat Vince, but Vince has nothing to be ashamed about. He had a heck of a run, and he did very well. And I sold my wholesale meat business to a guy. I knew him. He was in the meat business too. He wanted to expand his business, so he merged mine with his, and I couldn't be happier that he's doing well. There wasn't any jealousy in me whatsoever. I couldn't be happier for him. Uh, but I know some
I
guys,
think
and not
Vince
just
is worth 2.6 billion now, by the way.
what is that?
Vince McMahon is worth 2.6 billion now.
You mean he's not worth 3 billion? Maybe we should have a fundraiser. I mean, no, I mean he did well. He did well. He was not a nice person. He was especially rude to me, but that's personal. But business wise, you got to give credit as due. You know, um, he was the best. He's not always going to. Somebody's going to beat his records, and then somebody's going to beat that guy's records as time goes on. Uh, but you know, you shouldn't worry about stuff like that. When you retire, you retire. You know, and that's that.
You mentioned earlier you knew Jim Barnett. Is there any stories you could tell us about him, and do you have an impression?
Well, I only met Jim Barnett once when he was with the WWF and he came to Detroit. But I was trying to get through to him when we had these troubles. I thought if I could talk to a wrestling person instead of these people, whoever they were, then I could say, "Here's the situation." And Martino Angelo used to work for Jim Barnett, and when I first met Barnett, I said, "Martino Angelo told me to tell you hello," and he says, "Martino was a very good promoter." I says, "Well, I got your ear, Jim." I said, "I want to tell you about Wojo. I mean, this guy was a 13-time national champion. Let me tell you something I bet you didn't know about Wojo. I'm not, I'll get back to what the original story, but in 1968, he was a senior in high school and he won the national AAU championship. Do you know who he beat to win the AAU championship as a high school senior? Bob
No
Roop.
idea.
Bob Roop.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And then they
Interesting.
wrestled. Then they wrestled for the Olympic spot, and Bob Roop beat him by 1 point. Now, that's Wojo as a senior in high school. Imagine 4 years of college experience and all the stuff that he had become. Anyway, so I'm telling Jim Barnett, I says, this guy, he was a 13-time national AAU champion. He was on 4 Olympic teams. He as alternate or regular. He was an AAU champion, NCAA champion, Pan American champion. And Jim Barnett looked at me and says, "I'm so impressed." Was I got a feeling he meant he wasn't impressed. So I was trying to sell Wojo. I thought, yeah, I didn't do a good job. I guess I'm a lousy salesman. The way he
Y-
said it, "I'm so impressed."
Yeah, well, today he would have been offered a WWE development contract for sure. As far as Chris Colt, you also mentioned him a bunch of
Yes.
times. He was on Dark Side of the Ring. Any stories to share about him?
Well, Chris Colt and I were very good friends. And no, I'm straight. He was gay. I had him over to the house. We were friends with my whole family. Uh, he would come to the sports arena the day of the matches early and work out with me in the ring, showing me stuff. We used to travel together. He was one of the most fantastic workers. I don't know if you had the privilege of seeing him, because in those days, TV and tapes that weren't around like you talked about earlier. Uh, but this guy could make it happen. Believe me. Angelo Poffo once told me, that's Randy Savage's father and Lanny Poffo's father, for those that don't know. I know you know, but he said, "Chris Colt's the greatest worker in the country." I came right from Angelo Poffo. There's nobody better. His problem was he was a little small, although one time he took steroids and pumped up pretty big. And and he had, controversy with the drugs and stuff. And but I'm telling you, uh, the stuff I've seen on the internet, the matches they do have don't do him justice. When he was a younger man, he and Ronnie Dupre, when they were the Hells Angels, they were one of the greatest tag teams. And then when he teamed up with Fargo, they Ronnie Dupre died, and Don Fargo had the Chain Gang, and his partner got shot in that accident and had to quit wrestling. And Ronnie Dupre died of a heart attack. So they merged the two teams and called them the Hells Angels Chain Gang. And they could really make it happen. Don Fargo was a really great worker, as was Chris Colton. Together, they were excellent. And and Harley Race even made some. He was watching Colt work once with me at Cobo, and he was really he was impressed with Colt, and he told me that. And Harley and I, once again, were like Andre the Giant. Maybe we talked, we got along, but I tell you, I really think the world of Harley Race. When I was very new in the business, they wanted to work an angle at Cobo where he had beaten somebody up and he wasn't going to stop beating him after the match. And they wanted somebody to run in the ring and try and stop him and have him beat that guy up too. Well, who do you suppose got elected to be the guy to run into the ring? Me. Okay, Jerry Jaffe was going to run in the ring and try to save the guy. So Harley takes me aside. I mean, he says, now listen, Jerry, I don't want you to be nervous. He says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to slug you a few times. I'm going to slam you in a spot in the ring where I want you. Just don't move. I'm going to get up on the top rope. I'm going to come down. You know the headbutt he used to do from the top rope. He says, I promise you, you won't feel a thing. Just sell it. I mean, he took that much time with a guy. He wasn't even going to work with me. It was just for after the match thing. But he was that meticulous. I went in the ring. I did what he said. I laid still. He hit me with that headbutt. I felt nothing. Nothing. And as I got later on in years, I realized that he didn't have to do that. He could have just beat the hell out of me, and stuff, but he was really a class act. I never got to work with him in a straight up match, but I never forgot him taking me aside before the run in and taking the time to tell me what he wanted, what he was going to do, what to expect. And that was just it. So 4 stars for Harley Race. And that's high, 5 stars for Harley Race. Yeah.
Here's a question from Garrett. Who do you think the best WWE wrestler was from any era?
Buddy Rogers.
I had a feeling you were going to say that. Someone is asking about Psycho Sam Cody. I
I
don't know.
know
I'm not
Sam.
familiar with him.
I haven't seen him in years. Here's a guy's heart was in business. He'd do anything. He was rough. He was tough. He was a bump taker. I have nothing but high regards. I always used him when I had my promotions. Whenever he was available, I would use him. Bruiser made him a Russian called Ivan Zatkov. But he was very good. Once again, high marks for Psycho Sam Cody.
Do you remember the WWA promotion in Detroit? Was that one of the promotions you worked for?
The WWA, that was
Yeah.
me, wasn't it? When Bruiser.
Oh, there you go. It probably was you. So there you go. You were a successful promoter. Could you just share for people like me that are also promoters some advice on promoting wrestling? Because I'm sure some of it transcends time.
Well, I'll be happy to give you my overall view on promotion, but the kids today don't want to listen to me. When I would have an old timer tell me something when I was new, I would thank him and say, Jerry, if you do it this way instead of that way, it'd be better. I would appreciate the fact that an old timer. But today, I had a guy once working for me. He was kind of like an Abdullah the Butcher kind of a guy, but he hit the guy and he'd stand there, hit the guy and stand there. And I said, if you just followed the guy around a little more and hit him some more and kick him some more, and he told me he used the F word and quit. So nobody tells me how to work. So that's what that's what I was up against. But anyway, I would say this: when I got Bruiser Bedlam together, I used to go to these Booker meetings. The first thing the Booker would always say is, "Anybody not going to do a job? If I ask them, tell me now." That was standard for the Booker's meeting in the old days. But I did a little bit differently. I got all the guys together before our first match. And I says, listen, this is what I have an idea. The idea of this promotion is we're going to be an ensemble cast. That's what they call it in theater. There's not going to be any superstars. There's not going to be any Hogans or anybody like that. We're all going to be considered somebody that could beat somebody else. Whoever two guys were wrestling, there's a chance that either one of them could win. We're going to have guys doing jobs. We're going to have guys getting put over, and then it's going to go the other way. But we're going to build certain guys up, but everybody here is going to be taken care of. I didn't have very many guys quit on me. Brought in Scott Steiner, and he did everything that we asked him to do. And if you can get a promotion, that number one, I think we talked about this one of our shorter interviews. If you're new, get an old timer to advise you. You're still the boss. I'm not saying make him the boss, but you should have what Cosa Nostra calls a consigliere. You need a consigliere, an experienced guy to talk in your ear like Jerry Graham did to Vince McMahon. We never did get to finish that story, but that was true. But you got to get somebody to advise you with things. And just because you're a good worker doesn't have any sign that you might be good behind the scenes, which is just as if not more important than getting things together. You've got to arrange for your buildings, your TV, your advertising, your this, your that. Get the best people you can get. Don't ever take any shortcuts. The little bit more money you spend will come back 10 times over. And that's my advice to get good workers. If a guy's not getting a job done, like when I wasn't what Vince looked for, like I said, just tell him you don't have to say you stink, you're no good, we don't want you. All you got to do is say it's not what we're looking for right now, maybe later down the road. Let the guy off easy, let him have some dignity, and get rid of a guy that I didn't fire too many guys. One guy fired, I'm not going to mention his name because he came in higher than a kite and he screwed up his match, and he'd been warned about that before, about coming in high, and so I fired him. Most of the guys would go on to other promotions, or one guy fired because he worked for our opposition right in Toledo, right outside of Toledo, a suburb of Toledo. And I told him, you can't do that. You're on our TV. You can't go work for an independent guy. And he did anyway. And the guy was a friend of mine. I said, you can't do this. If you get away with this, then everybody that works for us will be taking bookings. If that guy would have called me and said he wanted guys and paid a booking fee, that's how the business was structured at that time, I would have been out of work with them. But he just called my guys and says, come, and none of my guys had come, but this one guy came. But so you want your guys to be loyal to you, is my point. You want them to get, when you're in the ring, don't get yourself over, get your match over. And you want to get the whole show over. You want to have good matches. You want to have matches that people enjoy, talk about. You want to have a good finish, man. You got something going in the main event that's hot. Keep remembering what we said about shelf life. Always have something cooking underneath. Always have an angle getting ready to pop up as soon as the one you're working on is over, because you can't play Gone with the Wind every week if you got a movie theater, even if it is the greatest picture. You got to change up. So something cooking underneath, have your advertising in line, have everything the way it's supposed to be. Obviously, the WCW didn't have their advertising department very well organized because, what we were getting. But that's my advice. And have that guy with you to talk in your ear for you.
Well, I appreciate that advice. A couple fan questions I'll throw in here. You've been generous with your time. Someone wants to know
Absolutely.
what were you trying to do with WWA Superstars in 1989? Why did you close Bruiser Bedlam Fold?
That's a good question. Dick the Bruiser didn't want to be active anymore. I said, well, Bruiser, if we're going to use your name, you got to have something to do with the show. And he was a little offended that I took his name off the show because I wanted him to come in occasionally. We had one show a month. I said, if you come in a few times a year, he would have drawn better that way. But he just didn't want to do anything. So he still had his piece of the promotion. I wouldn't do that to somebody. The guy's a partner, he's your partner. But he didn't like, and I had to change the executive producer to George Cannon because of you're familiar with the Canadian content rules. I don't know if they still have them or not, but then they did. So that gave us a
Yeah, they
50%.
do.
They gave us a 50% Canadian content because we said George Cannon was the producer, which he wasn't, but that got us on all the Windsor Station, and I don't know if it was anywhere else or not. George took care of Toronto, did a good job for us. But the question was, why did we close it down? Is that the question?
Yes, and what were you trying to do with WWA Superstars in '89?
Trying to make money. What do you try to do with your promotion?
Exactly. And why did you close it down? And just to be clear for the people just tuning in, Bruiser Bedlam is not the wrestler that started also around that time.
No, but I was
That
there when he
was
was
a
born. I was there when he was born. He
right.
was working on the show. Johnny Canine, Jimmy Cornette was there. Says, come work for Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Let's call you Bruiser Bedlam. I said, geez, he just took the name of my promotion and gave it to a wrestler, but what am I going to do? Get F. Lee Bailey to come in and lawsuit? I said, just let it go. The reason we shut down well, let's just call it Bruiser Bedlam because it was still the same company. We just changed the name. It was all Bruiser Bedlam. Okay. Is WCW had announced that they were going to start running national shows like WWF was. Now, when we were competing with WWF, it wasn't too bad because they were only coming to Toledo and Detroit, 3 times a year. That was the same deal that WCW was going to have. So there was room for a second smaller promotion. But then WCW came along and they were going to do the same thing. That means they were going to be in Detroit, Indianapolis, all of our towns, Chicago, Toledo, whatever, 6 times a year. So I sat down with Bruiser, and I want to make something emphatically clear right now. I've said this on other talk shows, but I want to make this emphatically clear. We started Bruiser Bedlam as a extension of WWA because our problem was it was hard to get new talent, and people weren't buying. Guys were getting old. And so the deal we came up with was Dick the Bruiser was going to scour the world and find the best talent he could find. We didn't put in the word younger, but it was implied, okay? So everybody was coming in, the new guys were all discoveries of Dick the Bruiser. I found this guy in Kentucky. I found this guy in China. I found this guy. So we brought in younger guys, and then we had a segment where I would interview the new guys. Okay, well, the point was, we made money every year we were in business. And the second to last promotion, I believe, was July of '89, was when Wojo had his mixed match with Leon Spinks. And we really made big money on that one. And then we had one more match after that, which was a huge draw. I don't know why. It was just it was a fundraiser show for a booster club in Ohio, but it did like $8,000 or something. It was really a good show for us. And the Bruiser and I and the other guys decided to shut down the show because we were projecting. It was Aldous Huxley that said, inevitable consequences are beacons for wise men and scarecrows for fools. So the inevitable consequence, which Bruiser and I agreed upon, was we were not going to be able to survive with 6 big promotions coming into all of our towns every year. But every show we ran that was profitable, I put money aside in a bank account. So in case we ran into an unexpected expense or if we had a loss that we weren't expecting, we'd have money to pay the guys with. But we had a large chunk of money saved and we made money. And when we closed down, I divided the money up equally. We had 4 partners, Dick the Bruiser, me, Chris Carter, and Wojo. And you see so many times on the internet, these pseudo journalists, I call them, they're not like you, the real thing. They don't do their homework. Bruiser Bedlam was a successful promotion from beginning to end. We made money. We got a, call it severance pay. We closed down and we went our separate ways. Everything has a shelf life. And like Kenny Rogers says, you got to know when to hold him. You got to know when to fold him. And I resent the fact that anybody that doesn't know what they're talking about says that we went out of business, we went broke. We did not. And I'm telling you that because we're friends. I'm not going to lie to you. Now, what do I care? I'm going to be 77 on June 7th. I don't want to die with a lie on my lips.
You closed before that happened. You saw the writing on the wall
Yeah,
with the
inevitable
bigger promotion.
consequences. A good
Yeah.
businessman does that. You're not going to. It wasn't going to stay together, and Miller Beer stuck with me, and that's why I was able to bring WCW in. They were paying for TV all over the country. The only place they had free TV was Toledo. They had 2 stations, and I couldn't get them to take a call. I had a contact there that was dumber. I won't say dumb. He wasn't knowledgeable in the business. He might have been a smart man, but he wasn't the right man for that job. He didn't even understand things I was telling him. And he's the one that said, how can I let that happen? To let the WWF get us kicked off of Fox. I was groveling, calling. I told Georgia, the girl who answers the phone, specifically what was happening. And she said she gave them the message and nobody seemed to care. But I could have, kept them out of Toledo for a while. But anyway, after WCW, I just went to work for Independence for another 10 years. And then I quit, made a comeback in, I don't know, 2009, 2010. So I can say I wrestled in 4 decades, 2 centuries, and 2 millenniums. So, uh,
Last question I'll throw in here. Someone wants to know about your memories of Dave Drayson, who I've interviewed, and Sweet Daddy Malcolm Monroe, who I'm not familiar with.
okay, Sweet Daddy Malcolm Monroe was a friend of mine. Uh, he was trained in Lou Klein's gym, which was wrestling school in Detroit, and we got to be friends, and we began to travel together. And I got him in with Dick the Bruiser, and Dick the Bruiser started using him right as Sweet Daddy Malcolm Monroe. Uh, and then when he started his own promotion, after he left Bruiser, I worked for him there for a while. And Dave Supermouth Drayson is a good guy. He was a good manager, but we never worked in any shows together. I don't know what it was. It was different promotions, different eras, whatever. But I talked to him on Facebook from time to time with letters and stuff. I had nothing but good things to say about the Supermouth. Uh, but he should always remember that Dr. Jerry Graham Jr. is Supermouth point two or whatever it is. What's the computer term that makes you better?
Point oh,
Point
I
oh,
think they call it.
point oh two. I was Supermouth point oh two. Uh, uh,
Or
that's
2.0, 2.0, yeah.
2.0. I was Supermouth
Yeah.
2.0. That goes for the other managers too. But we all have our egos, don't we?
For sure. And my last question to you today is there's so many versions of this Dr. Jerry Graham breaking into the hospital, throwing his mother over the shoulder when she was passed away. Could you tell us the real version that I'm sure you've heard?
I can tell you Dr. Jerry Graham's version, which I think
Yeah.
he told me this personally, if anybody just know my source. He had a breakdown. He loved his mother and he cracked. He didn't want anybody touching her. He was being totally irrational. Looking back, he realized he put her over his shoulder. They they tried to stop him. I've read stories that he pulled a shotgun on him, but he told me he carried a pistol. I knew he carried a pistol. I don't know how many guys carry shotguns with a suit and tie, but anyway, he said he pulled a pistol and shot at the people, just at them, but still that's a felony. And he took her out, and they finally got him, and he ran away. I think they arrested him in Florida. I don't think they got him right away. And they decided he'd been insane, so they put him in an institution, and they let him out. And he used to joke, "I've got papers that say I'm sane. Do you?" No, he got papers when they let him out of the institution. So I got official
So
papers that say I'm sane. Do you? No.
exactly. So at that point of time he was deemed sane. So
Yeah,
so take that for all of the stories about him.
yeah. All these people say Jerry Graham was crazy. I want to see your papers that say you're sane. He had them. You don't have them, but he had them. Okay. Anybody that gets in wrestling's got to be a little bit off. I mean,
Yeah, well, here's the question. Does it actually, well, you have to be off to get into it, but does it make you more off or does it turn you crazy or do you have to be crazy to get into it?
I think a lot of guys probably got into it that were probably pretty straight shooters. But when you realize the nature of the business is you can't advance except at somebody else's expense. If you're going to be in the main event, that means somebody else has got to leave the main event. So it becomes a backstabbing business. And there was a guy whose name I won't mention that was backstabbing me the first night when Andre shook hands with me. He was a referee and he saw them. So he was taking to all the other guys, they told me he was taking you, every mistake you made, he was pointing out to the Sheik. But the Sheik was understanding it was my first match. They weren't expecting referee perfect, and they hired me. So a few years later, this guy's going to do a job for me in Indianapolis. This is when I was Jerry Graham, and he was there for one thing. Uh, he brought a guy, a very good guy, a friend of mine, Ricky the Crusher Cortez, with him, who was a big name at one time in the business. And he took me aside and says, "Jerry, could you go easy on Al? He's a little concerned. Could you give him a few things to do?" He had to bring his bodyguard with him. So anyway, I probably, once again, like I said, the guy was trying to get me fired, but I gave him a few things to do and I beat him. And then I got yelled at by Bruce, those guys, that I gave him too much. And Bobo Brazil even told me, he said, he was your meat. A guy like that, you just take him apart. So I did a guy a favor that screwed me and I got yelled at. So that wasn't a good night for me. But what are you going to do?
Exactly. And I do think at least the business nowadays, the crazy people that used to be in it might be out of jobs now. It used to be a place where people that couldn't necessarily function in the regular world, not you, but other people
Yeah, well, no,
like Jerry Graham, like Jerry Graham. But
yeah,
now they're college educated and stuff, and you're not on the road 7 days a week anymore. So it's more for regular people now, apparently.
yeah. Well, with me, I had the Tyler Meat Company, which is my bread and butter. So I was never at any promoter's mercy. And that was part of, I realized that was part of the structure of the business. They wanted to get you where you needed them to support your family, and they would take advantage of you. And I walked out on more than one promoter that cheated me on my money, or they might promise you money, or we'll make it up next time. Do you ever notice that when you're having a bad time, you're their partner? We had a bad time. I'll make it up to you later. But when I do good, hey, I'm the one that took the risk. I mean, where's they going to make it up to me money when I took the smaller payoff?
Yeah, I hate that is one thing with wrestling. No matter how bad the house is, and some of the times you got to blame it on the draws. They'll demand their money, but then when it's a big house, maybe because you worked your ass off promoting, they want more money, but they won't give you a break if they don't draw.
Yeah, well, the thing is, uh, uh, they they risk their money. I understand that, and they have some bad times, and they got to pay us less. And I would sometimes take settlements if I knew the promoter. I worked for him all the time, and I could see he was having a tough time. I wasn't a total jerk, but there was guys that would get nasty, and I would just say, okay, well, when I say walk out on them, if I was advertised, I'd do the match. I wouldn't have anybody accuse me of, but then I wouldn't work for them anymore. If I promised you a certain amount of money to come to work for me in Toledo, that's yours. That's what you're going to get. I don't care if the house loses money. That's why I had that account for at Bruiser Bedlam. We brought in the Iron Sheik, we brought in Wildfire Tommy Rich, and they drew enough to pay for themselves, no question. But in case they didn't, we were financially solid, you know, and that's something I try to tell the people, and I just absolutely, uh, like I said, resent anybody that says anything differently.
I have to ask this because I didn't think of it. Did you have any memories of Bobby Heenan?
Bobby Heenan.
Yeah.
He was a little rude to me in the dressing room once in Indianapolis, so I just kept away from him. Uh, I nothing drastic. I thought, I introduced myself, and he says, "Hi, I'm Jerry Graham." He says, "That's your problem, brother." He's another one who wouldn't shake hands. I said, "Ole Anderson." I just Bobby Heenan wouldn't shake hands with me either. So I said, "Okay, that's my problem." So I
You
just
would have been competition to him, right, though, if you were a manager?
no, he was working for Vern Gagne. He was doing Bruiser a favor coming in. So
Okay.
I just that's you know he was one of the all-time great managers. Once again, I'm not going to divide personal feelings by work. He didn't. I think he was better when he was younger. As he got older, he tried to be more of a stand-up comedian. But when he was younger, working for Bruiser, I thought he was the best manager there was. He got some heat, some serious heat, and he and even in the older days, I said maybe they wanted some jokes. I don't know, but. Uh, but he was the real deal. There's no question. Bobby Heenan was top of the line manager, and he was a top of the line worker too when he was younger. Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate you going about half an hour overtime here, but the
Doesn't
fans
matter.
were
I have
asking a
no
lot of
life.
questions.
I have no life. I'm like Al
I
Bundy.
doubt that that's true. I doubt that's true. But
Well,
yeah, I greatly appreciate it. You have a Facebook page, Jerry Jaffe, right? Am I
yeah,
pronouncing it right now?
yes,
I know you as your
JAFFE.
wrestling name.
Anybody wants to talk to me on Facebook, it's Jerry Jaffe. When I get a friend request, I check. If it's somebody from wrestling, I accept them. If it's somebody that went to school with me or went to the same school I did, I accept them. If it's some lovely, beautiful girl that needs some airplane ticket money to come and visit me, those are the ones I don't accept.
Yeah. I don't get all those Facebook is full of fake accounts these days
The
and
thing that
fake
scares me is that beautiful
things.
girl in the picture is probably some guy with a beard and a cigar and tattoos sending me pictures, so I'd send him the money for, for the airplane
Yeah.
ticket. But no, anybody that wants to contact me on Jerry Jaffe, there's several Jerry Jaffes on Facebook, but this one's got me and Wojo as the cover picture, so you can't miss it.
With his Hall of Fame plaque.
Yeah, from the Mid-American Conference. Yeah, yeah. He got that way too late. It was years later. He should have got that right after he went. You know, when he was in college, he only lost one match in 4 years, and it was the NCAA finals to Chris Taylor. And he beat Chris Taylor in other matches. People don't know that. Chris Taylor, big 450-pound guy. Think about that. And so the one match he lost, he finished second in the NCAA. The other years, he finished first in the NCAA. He lost one match in 4 years at the University of Toledo. It was to Chris Taylor. Bruce Bumgardner, a great wrestler. Wojo beat him. Like we said, Bob
How
Roop.
would he have done against Haku? How would he have done against Haku?
Well, you know, here we go. We start with the shooting again. If they were going to have a strict amateur match, he would have beaten Haku. But in a street fight, I wrestled Haku when I was in Hawaii, and he was very impressive. But I don't know if he's trained to be an amateur wrestler or not. But I know I was there. It was like my second or third match. He was supposed to pile driver me on the cement floor. And being young and wanting to get over, he didn't hurt me though. It was kind of scary because he was so big and tough looking, but he was okay to work with. He was, like I said, snug. Well, I can deal with snug. I can't deal with crowbars. You know, snug is fine. And my prediction, I could be wrong. I did pick Japan to win World War II, so I'm not always right. But I think if Haku and Wojo had a strict college amateur match, 3 periods with points and rules, I think Wojo would win. If they have a street fight, I don't know. Haku looks pretty tough. No, he doesn't look pretty tough. He is pretty tough. I consider him a friend of mine, so I'm not going to go any further because I want to stay on his good side.
Yeah, I saw that you had a picture of him on Facebook as well as a picture of you beating up Santa Claus. So you're definitely a heel.
Well,
And
hey,
I'll let you.
I got 14 grandkids, 6 kids. Do you know how much Santa Claus costs me every year? That's 20 Christmas presents and 20 birthday presents. But if they all came to
That's
see me
karma.
wrestle, if they all buy a ticket to see me wrestle, we could make money.
Yeah, 100%. Well, again, I appreciate it. Great stories. We'll maybe have to have you back again because we didn't even touch on Hawaii, but I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to let the fans know.
I just want you to know, the wrestling fans, that you're the guys that make it all possible. I do not like any wrestlers I hear bad mouthing the fans, because if you guys didn't support us, we wouldn't have a business. That's why at my darkest, deepest times of being a heel wrestler, I always had time for an autograph. I always had time to talk to somebody. And like I said, you fans are what made this business possible for every single wrestler that went through the ropes, got into the ring. Thank you.